because we're right back with Mike. There you
Right
go.
back. We haven't even moved.
No.
I
But
was
Mike
just dancing
appeared.
to the music.
Welcome to the show, Mike. Welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. Who are you? Why are you here?
Well, I'm a principal AI ML solution architect, and I focus on identity verification and fraud prevention. And I'm here to talk to you today about identity verification and the new Rekognition V6 Faces API.
All right. So, as we mentioned, identity verification, this is potentially a pretty large topic.
And a scary one.
We could probably be here for days talking about this. So, you just mentioned Rekognition V6. What else are we actually focused in on today in terms of identity verification?
Well, I think, one of the things is let's take some of the mystery out of it. There's some really simple things that we can do with Rekognition to do some biometric verification of people by comparing their faces to, say, a government ID. And we've seen where some customers are able to cut down on their fraud by as much as 50% at the front door just by requiring folks to present some form of biometric screen at the very beginning of their registration process.
And I don't want to get too philosophical, but I'm known
But
to
you
do
will
it.
you will if you're pushed.
I will if you don't stop me. So, I did want to talk a little bit about what constitutes identity. Identity is very different in the physical world than it is from the digital world, right? When storing identity as compute or in compute rather, or in digital storage, it's a different kind of thing than it is physically, right? So, Mike, would you mind going through some of the physical characteristics that constitute identity and maybe how that translates to the digital world?
Yeah. So, your face is a great example. I mean, fingerprints and things like that. But your
I
face,
would not have put it that way.
My face is a great example. You're right.
Your face is a great example. And when you think about, there's easy ways to, spoof registration captchas and get around some of the really simple, friction that people put up when you're, say, signing up for some sort of, digital account. What's harder to get around is when you actually have to present your face. And it turns out fraudsters don't want to present their face on camera.
Right.
The other thing is that we can also, we all have some form of government issued ID. Maybe it's a badge from your employer or, your driver's license, passport, you name it, right? Really simple thing we can do is just match your selfie to that issued ID and say, hey, do those faces match? And that really cuts down and enables us to actually verify people's identities to say, yeah, this is the person that's being presented is actually the person on the ID.
So you mentioned faces, and when we were chatting about this, a couple of days ago, you made a comment about how fraud models alone aren't enough.
That's right. It's I look at it almost like in 2 or 3 legs of the stool of fraud. Historically, we use classification models and unsupervised learning methods to detect, fraudulent patterns. Typically, those patterns repeat themselves. Well, what happens when you have somebody that registers or commits that very first transaction, right? Where you don't have that pattern of history from that person. Well, these type of things, by adding some identity verification at the front door, you can actually stop a whole lot of fraud from ever taking place. And so we kind of look at it as at the prevention side. So you kind of want to have both. You want to have some sort of risk ranking of activity, and then you want to add some identity verification to make sure that the person that's actually performing an activity is the person that's, should be performing that activity. So that's kind of how I look at it. They kind of go hand in hand. They are different, but they work really well together.
Does that mean then that if I have like that front door gate, the fraud models that I might employ on the back end can be simpler too? Is that an initial benefit?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And what you'll find is that you'll cut out a lot of the noise. And so the fraud models can start to really concentrate on the things that they're really good at. But, like when we get like bots and things like that, that kind of activity where we get bots registering for accounts and stuff, having some form of identity verification at the front door will actually stop a lot of that bot traffic from ever registering on your
Right.
site.
Yeah, and this is one of my favorite topics, just because it, like, the work being done in this space is really interesting to me. Um, Tying that digital identity back to your physical identity is a problem that is still ongoing, right? We still have yet to crack that. Lots of people have suggested, like, cryptographic. Everybody has their own PKI. Basically, you get a public key and a private key, and everybody has their own government issued one. Or there's been all kinds of different ways to approach this, but we still haven't yet to crack it, I don't think, as a society, or as a global problem. But you see more and more facial recognition matching to an identity being utilized, right? We have it on our phones. It's becoming more and more of an accepted
Absolutely. Absolutely.
verification.
Even in like fleet management where we have a whole bunch of drivers, right? We have those in car, in cab cameras. We can actually determine, is the driver the person that's supposed to be driving, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes we have buddy swapping where, you know, I call Joe and say, "Hey, can you take my route?" Well, now, the employer can say, "Oh, hey, you weren't the one actually driving that load." So there's things that we can do with just basic, some fairly sophisticated, although I say basic, fairly sophisticated facial recognition and face matching.
The
Yeah.
sophisticated side is on the AWS side, though, which is nice for our
Exactly.
customers, right? Our
Right.
customers don't have the same level of complexity or sophistication because of some of
Exactly.
our services.
That's right. And with a handful of just service calls, you can do all of this identity verification quite simply without having to be an expert in machine learning.
All right. So I know when we were talking again the other day, we were going through some like usage scenarios, and one of the ones that popped up with AM with his music, and so was purchasing tickets. So
Exactly.
can we go through that and see how this all works?
Yeah, this is I mean, it's products too, like the I won't give specifics, but like a Playbox 360,
Mhm.
that's
Yeah.
like three logos combined into one to obfuscate what I'm talking about. Those are very hot commodity and limited supply products that it's hard to purchase them online because there are these armies of bots that are employed.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
It's
Yeah.
It's
so
an
controlling
excellent
that.
use case, right? And if we are able to prevent the bots, and that's exactly what they do, right? You might say, "Oh, well, we're going to limit to one person, one purchase per person,"
Yeah. Or
Yeah.
my
right? And the
next
next thing you know, they've got 6,000 email addresses, and they're just,
yes.
Yeah,
clicking,
it drives
clicking,
me
clicking.
bad when I'm purchasing concert tickets, and you've got to get in and get through that capture process and get through
Mhm.
all the other details before the bots arrive, and suddenly it's sold out. It's like,
And then you can't go to Coachapalooza, Steve.
there is that.
Yeah.
I'm combining them, right?
I know. You're doing
You
very
see
well
what
at
I'm
combining
doing?
them. You
You
could
see
have
what I'm
just said
doing?
games console earlier on, but
No, this is more fun for me. All right, so Mike, you're going to actually show us some of this working,
Mm,
right? These are several AWS services working together
yeah,
to
yeah.
accomplish this solution, right? Maybe
Yeah.
you could talk through that as you show us.
Yeah. So I'm going to flip over to my screen.
All right, let me know when you're ready.
I'm ready.
And you're on.
Awesome.
All right.
So I crafted, I'm really good at the back end stuff. I'm not great at the front end stuff.
If I
So
had a
bear
dollar
with
for
me.
every time an engineer has said that, I'd probably have $2 at this point. But anyway,
Yeah, so I crafted this really simple registration form to just sort of talk through what we might do. So here I've got Jane sample, and Jane has an email address,
Mhm.
Jane at example.com.
This is totally a real person,
Yeah,
obviously.
and she has password. And so we hit next. And what we might do is say, hey, present your government issued identity, identification document. And here Jane went up. She got one of these new driver's licenses. This is one of those real IDs.
Mhm.
Um, and you can see, hey, there's two pictures up here. We're also able to extract all of the text information off of that driver's license and normalize things like dates and whatnot. So we can say, well, there's restrictions, or, what's the date of birth, that type of thing. And so with a couple just API calls, we can just take an ID, like, a real ID, and extract that information. And then next we might say, hey, present a selfie, flip the camera on, take a picture, and we'll get that similarity match. And with the similarity, we get confidence, and we have things like brightness, quality, pose, and a whole bunch of other features. But we can see, the selfie versus the ID matches. And so that's kind of the guts of it. And just for humoring me, I have a notebook here just to sort of show you how easy it is to run some of these APIs. I think I make, like 4 API calls, if that.
Wow.
And so with identity verification, it's all sort of driven by Rekognition and another service called Text Track. But what we'll do is, the user will submit a selfie. We'll validate the quality of the selfie. We'll compare the selfie with an ID card. And then we'll take a look and say, does that person exist in our data store? Maybe we've seen them before. So that way we have the ability to prevent those like duplicate users from registering. We can also take and extract the information off of the ID and then pass it to some other downstream service. So that's kind of what I'll walk you through here. So I've got a whole bunch of information. So we'll use Rekognition to do the validation, compare the selfie with the ID, search against our collection. We'll use Text Track to extract the text and classify the components of a driver's license. And then I might just throw it into a third service like Fraud Detector to actually pull everything together. So here's our selfie. Here's Jane. And, the very first thing we want to do is look at the quality of the image. So with this Detect Faces API, it'll say, all right, give me that image and let's take a look at the quality. Well, we can see the brightness. It's not the sharpest picture. We get a score of 83 on the sharpness. And just for completeness sake, I kind of dump all of the response elements here. You can see, the confidence that she is not sad, right, is 2%, right? She's very high confidence that she is not sad. She's actually probably happy, right? So we have all of these features that come back from that response.
I don't know that it could really tell that about me,
Yeah.
Mike. I think it might guess that I'm not sad, but deep down,
Yeah.
you know,
You want to have that
there's a
nice
sadness
toothy smile.
down below there.
So here's her driver's license. Again, this is just one of these real IDs. And, if you go out to South Carolina and the real ID, these are the IDs that they provide for folks to kind of tinker with. And you can see we've actually got 2 faces here. So with compare faces, all we're going to do is take the selfie image against our target image, and we're going to present, what's the similarity score. And you'll notice here that first, the large face, right, is almost identical to our selfie. Well, it turns out I clipped it. The second face, which is this hologram that we have here, has a slightly lower similarity, but it's still like 99.98%. And you can see the brightness and the sharpness of the image. You also get all sorts of things like bounding boxes and landmarks and stuff like that, if you want to kind of move over some of those faces. But it basically says, hey, the selfie that's presented is the same person that's on the ID. That's check number 1. Check number 2 says, hey, let's go look and see, have we seen this selfie or this image before? So I'll take that image and I will go compare it against a collection. What a collection is just a collection of faces. Think of it as a database that I can just go query and say, hey, have I seen this person before? Well, I index that government issued ID, right? I can see I've got my driver's license in there, and I'm getting back the same similarity scores. So I can say, yes, that selfie is in our collection. This is a verified user. Maybe we'll let her go register and go buy some tickets to the next Megadeth concert. right? So that's sort of the recognition piece. In its simplest form, have we seen this person before? And does the face presented match a face on an ID or somebody that we've seen before? That's identity verification in its simplest form. The next piece is to say, okay, well, they presented a government ID to me. Can I extract some information about it and can I classify it? So one way to do that is to use the text track Analyze ID, which will actually extract the pieces and parts off of that driver's license and then classify it. So we can say, well, first name is Jane, last name is Sample, middle name is Maria, and we'll get confidences for each one of these. So we know the state address is in South Carolina, the zip code, document number. This is actually super helpful, when building up that database of new and reoccurring users. So a simple way to sort of pre-populate your registration fields is, extract that text and put it into those registrations.
Just as a reminder, I seem to remember that at the San Francisco Summit a couple of weeks back, we were talking about the textract analyze feature, right? So anybody who's interested in that should go check out that AWS on Air episode back then, where we walk through this in some more detail.
Yeah,
It's super powerful and super cool.
I was going to ask, is there a list of supported IDs, or does it work with pretty general IDs that you'd find?
Yeah, so the officially supported list is US issued driver's licenses and passports.
Okay.
I have personally used it with other countries' driver's licenses, and it works pretty well. There are other options, however. In addition to that, we can actually use Rekognition and their detect text functionality, which will extract all of the text off of the ID and provide confidences and bounding boxes. What it doesn't do is classify the text for you. So it wouldn't say, this is a first name, this is a last name. There are other components that we could probably do that with, but I really like the functionality of Analyze ID for doing this because it goes ahead and classifies everything nice and neatly for me.
We had a question come in about Rekognition. Mike, you might be a good person to answer this.
Okay.
So what if the person gets older after the government ID has been issued, say 10 years, and the face has changed?
Yeah. So surprisingly, the face changes, but sort of the underlying structure doesn't change at the end of the day, right? We take all these different points and stuff. And so you may get slight deviations in similarity, but you won't get massive changes. So, like the position of the eyes, the shape of the nose, and you, of course, can take multiple different poses and pictures of the individual as well. The big thing that I would say just in practice is getting high quality images. Most, cameras on your computer and stuff are now very capable of taking decent pictures. But sometimes in certain areas, we might end up having low quality images. So things like sharpness and brightness, that's why we always want to check the images up front. Great question. So lastly, we might want to pull everything together. We've extracted some information like the similarity. I call that match confidence. We might have additional information about that person registering. Maybe they're a bot, that type of thing. And so we can pass it off to something like fraud detector, yet another solution. And it'll come back and say, hey, this is a high risk person. And the reason why it's risky, right? We might have some additional pieces and parts. So that's where it comes back to sort of that layering of the identity verification with additional tools and techniques to sort of prevent, our fraudsters from, buying up all the Megadeth tickets in October.
Jane's very passionate about Megadeth.
Yeah, I can tell. Yep.
Yeah. We had another question come in around textract, and speaking of identity, LinkedIn user, I think we didn't quite catch that in our software back here. Does it work in a high-speed contact center environment. So essentially, I think the question, maybe I will paraphrase, how long does it take to get results from Textract to Analyse ID?
Yeah, it's quite quick. And in fact, you can see like, you can do these in, sub-second types of responses, very fast. The extract text, detect text, in my opinion, seems to be a little bit faster, but we have some documentation on how to speed things up as well. Yeah.
Yeah, this is cool. I just thought of another real world use case for this. So a couple of years ago, I came back from a around the world trip. I've been away for several weeks. And when I got back to work, discovered that I was actually locked out of my laptop because my password had expired while I was away and I hadn't responded to the things. I had to go and find, an Amazon office in a city that was not my home city. And then on a video camera, hold up my badge against my face so that the person in the call center could verify that it was me and proceed. This would have made it so much simpler.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, you can see how in these streaming environments, being able to stream an image, compare it against a collection, and do that in a really responsive manner is important. And that's where the Rekognition Faces API v6 comes into play. Not only did we crank up the accuracy of our Faces API, but we also reduced the latency by like 70%. So there's a lot of improvements in Rekognition v6. So if folks have, maybe taken a look at Rekognition v4 or toyed around with it before, now's the time to come back and take a new, fresh look at it. We've launched a lot of new features recently, including some things around streaming that's it's definitely worth taking a second look at.
That was, I was going to ask you what you were going to tell the audience to go check out, but we did have a question come in. I think this goes back to the question I asked earlier about what IDs are supported. What about the Analyze ID function dealing with languages other than English, right? So basically a different character set than.
Yeah, again, right now, US IDs are what's supported. I believe they've got, a roadmap item for additional countries' IDs. I personally have used it with Latin American IDs, and it, worked flawlessly for me, but your mileage may vary.
Sure. And yeah, Rekognition v6, go check that out. Is there anything else that you would like the audience to go investigate more deeply?
Yeah, I definitely would suggest taking a look at some of our identity verification artifacts that we have out there. We have a nice blog. We've got a page off of Rekognition about identity verification. It's a hot topic, especially in today's day and age, and it's worth just sort of understanding the capabilities and what the art of the possible is with some of these new computer vision components.
Cool. Very cool, Mike. Really appreciate you coming on the show. Like I said, this is a topic that I have particular interest in. It's a hard problem to solve, tying back identity to a digital identity.
Anything that makes purchasing concert tickets easier is good in my book.
Yeah, agreed.
Or getting back into your locked out laptop.
Yes. There you go.
Absolutely. So Mike, come back and see us another time, please. But thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike.
Bye, Mike.